The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive Timelines members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The Jedi Temple was burning. Not metaphorically, it was burning from the inside out, structural and total, the kind of fire that doesn't leave ruins so much as it leaves absence. Smoke poured through the corridors in rolling black curtains. The ancient stone, carved by hands that believed the Jedi would stand for 10,000 more years, glowed orange at its edges like cooling lava. Anakin Skywalker stood in the corridor outside the Youngling training hall and felt none of it. Not the heat, not the smoke, not the screaming from somewhere deeper in the building, older voices, night-level voices, the sound of people who had survived 100 battles finally meeting the one they wouldn't. He felt nothing because the dark side had its hands around his nervous system like a fist, and when the dark side held you like that, the world reduced itself to a single directive. Move forward. Kill, continue. His lightsaber was ignited. Red, his red now, the blade he had earned by bleeding for Palpatine on this floor 20 minutes ago. When he had done the unthinkable and done it without hesitating. When he had taken Mace Windu's life not with passion but with the cold arithmetic of a man choosing one person over every other. The blade hummed beside his leg, and the light it threw against the stone walls was the color of everything he had already destroyed. He reached the door. The training hall door. He had walked through it 1,000 times. Every Padawan had. It was where younglings learned the basics of form, where they held their training sabers for the first time and discovered whether the Force moved through them the way the masters said it did. He had stood on the other side of this door at 9 years old, newly arrived from Tatooine, still smelling like engine oil and heat, and he had felt through the Force that something enormous was waiting for him on the other side. He pushed it open. 12 faces turned toward him. 12, he counted them the way a soldier counts threats, automatically, without choosing to. They ranged from perhaps 5 years old to perhaps 12. Human and Togrutan and Mirialan and one small Nautolan whose large black eyes reflected the red of his blade like 2 dark mirrors. They were clustered near the far wall, pressed against it, in the way that small things press against walls when they understand, on some pre-verbal level, that the open space in front of them is dangerous. One of them stepped forward. A boy. Human, maybe 10 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and a training saber gripped in both hands with the determined incorrectness of someone who had learned the grip 3 weeks ago and wasn't going to let go of it no matter what walked through the door. His chin was up. His eyes were bright with terror and something that wasn't quite courage but was doing its best impression. "Master Skywalker," the boy said. His voice only broke once. "There are too many of them. What do we do?" The question landed in Anakin's chest like a physical object. What do we do? He was asking for orders. He was asking because Anakin Skywalker was a general, a war hero. The Jedi the clones talked about in the barracks, and this boy had been taught that when a Jedi Master walked through the door, the right response was trust. He had been taught that the people on his side of the Force would protect him. Anakin's lightsaber hand rose. The motion was not his. Or it was his, but it belonged to the version of him that had been building for years in the dark. The one that Palpatine had been carefully constructing piece by piece. The one that had been given a name tonight. Lord Vader. Lord Vader's hand rose with the lightsaber, because Lord Vader did not feel what Anakin felt when 10-year-old boys asked him what they should do. Lord Vader had a directive. Kill, continue. The red blade rose to the height of the boy's chest. And something cracked. Not the stone. Not the air. Something inside the man holding the blade. Something that had been under pressure for 3 years of war. For every dead clone and every burning village and every compromise that was supposed to be the last one. For Padmé's face when he told her he was different and she looked at him like she was trying to find the person she married. For his mother's hands going still in the sand while he screamed and the Force screamed with him and nobody answered. Something cracked. He looked at the boy's face. Not at the threat assessment. At the face. At the way the terror in it was fighting the trust, and the trust was winning. Because this child had been raised in a world where trust in the Jedi was the first and most fundamental thing you were taught. He trusts me. The thought arrived without editorial, without the dark side's voice layered over it. Just the fact of it, bare and devastating. He trusts me the way I trusted Qui-Gon. Anakin's arm began to tremble. The boy was close enough to see it, and his eyes dropped to the shaking hand, and then came back up to Anakin's face. And something complicated moved through his expression. Not relief. Not renewed fear. Something in between. The question in his eyes was more disturbing than the terror had been. "Why are you shaking?" "Master Skywalker," a smaller voice said. Anakin's eyes moved without his permission. A little girl, Mirialan, couldn't have been older than 6, green skin pale with fear, one of her face markings not yet complete. They did those in stages, based on accomplishments, and she had not accomplished enough yet to finish the pattern that would eventually tell the story of her life. She was holding the sleeve of the Nautolan child beside her. Her eyes were fixed on Anakin's blade. "Is that a real one?" she whispered. "The red ones aren't supposed to be real." She said it the way children said things, as pure observation, no accusation in it. She had simply noticed a discrepancy between what she'd been taught and what she was seeing, and she was asking an adult to explain it. Anakin extinguished his blade. He did not decide to. The decision happened below the level of language, in whatever part of him had cracked open 30 seconds ago, and his thumb found the ignition and pressed it before Lord Vader could weigh in on the matter. The red light died. In the sudden darkness, 12 children exhaled. The boy with the training saber didn't lower it. "Smart kid. Something's wrong with you," the boy said, not an accusation. An observation about a discrepancy, delivered by someone young enough to say it plainly. "I could feel it when you came in. Through the Force. You felt like," he stopped. Searched for the word, like a fire that's eating itself. Anakin stared at him. "What's your name?" Anakin asked. "Marin," the boy said. "Padawan Marin Roll." A pause. "I haven't been assigned a master yet." "He'll never be assigned a master," said the voice that sounded like Lord Vader. "Because the order is over. Because you were supposed to finish it." "Lower the saber," Anakin said quietly. "Are you going to hurt us?" The honest answer was, "I came here to," and the second honest answer was, "I don't know if I've stopped," and neither was what a 10-year-old needed to hear with fire in the hallways, and no masters coming because the masters were dead. "Not tonight," Anakin said. Marin Roll lowered the training saber. The smallest ones moved first. They always did. The youngest. Because they hadn't yet learned caution the way older children learned it. And several of them crossed the floor and stopped at Anakin's feet, and looked up at him with the particular expression that children aimed at adults when they were waiting to be told what to do next. The Mirialan girl was among them. She had let go of the Nautolan sleeve. She looked up at Anakin's face, and seemed to find something there that satisfied some internal calculation, because she reached out and took hold of the edge of his robe the way a much smaller child might, and held on. The weight of her grip was almost nothing. It was the heaviest thing he had ever felt. Somewhere above them, through 3 floors of burning stone. Darth Sidious sat in an office that was not yet an emperor's throne room, but was moving toward it with every passing minute, and his plans were running exactly on schedule, and the only variable that had not performed as designed was currently standing in a youngling training hall, with 12 children looking up at him, and a dead lightsaber on his belt, and a crack running through the center of everything he thought he had become. Anakin looked at the boy. Marin, Padawan Marin Roll, unassigned, training saber now hanging loose at his side, watching Anakin with eyes that were exhausted and sharp, and very, very awake. "Stay close," Anakin said. "Don't make noise. Don't reach out through the Force unless I tell you to." "Where are we going?" Marin asked. Anakin didn't have an answer yet, but he turned away from the direction he had come from, away from Palpatine's office, away from the throne being built for a monster with his face, and he faced the emergency exit at the far end of the training hall, the one that opened onto the lower levels of the temple, the one that no clone unit had been assigned to cover because no one in the plan had anticipated that anyone in this building would be walking out. "Away," he said. And 12 children followed Darth Vader out of the burning temple. They moved through service corridors that Anakin had walked 100 times as a Padawan, cutting through the temple's lower levels toward the hangars. "You're doing it again," Marin said from behind him. Anakin didn't slow. "Doing what?" "Thinking so loud I can feel it through the Force. Whatever you're thinking about is scaring the little ones." Anakin locked it down, compressed the thoughts the way Obi-Wan had taught him in the field, building a wall between what he was feeling and what he was projecting. He felt the emotional static around the group settle. "Better," Marin said. "You're very perceptive for someone who hasn't been assigned a master." Master Urok said the same thing. He said it like it was a problem. They reached a junction and Anakin stopped, pressing himself against the wall and extending his Force senses ahead. 3 corridors. Left branch had clones, 2 of them, stationary, guarding the main stairwell. Right branch was clear but terminated at a locked security door that would require his handprint to open. And his handprint was currently attached to someone Palpatine expected to be his apprentice, which meant using it announced their position to every security terminal in the building. Center quarter was clear and descended toward the service levels. Center. He moved without explaining, and the children moved with him. "Tell me what happened," Marin said quietly. He was walking behind Anakin's left shoulder, matching his pace with careful step placement. "Not the summary. What happened?" "In the office." "You don't need to know." "I think I do," Marin said. "Because whatever happened is the reason you're walking us out instead of." He didn't finish. "And if we're going to follow you, we need to understand what changed your direction, whether it's permanent." Anakin was quiet for 20 paces. Then, Mace Windu came to arrest Palpatine. He brought Kolar, Tien, and Fisto. He kept his voice flat. Informational, the voice he used in debriefs, when the events being described were too large to discuss in any other register. Palpatine revealed himself. His Sith name is Darth Sidious. He killed Tien, Kolar, and Fisto before they could establish a combat position. Master Windu held him. "And you were there," Marin said. "I arrived during the fight. Palpatine told me he was too weak to fight, that Windu was going to execute him, that the Jedi were staging a coup. He told me the only way to save Padmé was to keep him alive, that he knew Sith techniques that could prevent death, that if Windu killed him, she would die." The corridor sloped downward. The emergency lighting here was dimmer, half the amber strips having already failed, and Anakin navigated by memory and Force sense in roughly equal measure. "Padmé," Marin said. "Your wife." Anakin stopped walking. He turned to look at the boy. Marin met his eyes without flinching. "I'm 10, not stupid. You said her name like it was the only word in the sentence. Like everything else was just context for that one word." A pause. "The Jedi Code forbids attachment. But the Council looked the other way on a lot of things because they needed you. And Palpatine knew about her." "Yes," Anakin said. "He used her." "Yes, to get you to stop Windu." "Yes," he said it 3 times and each time it landed like something dropped from height. Because the architecture of what Palpatine had done was so clear from the outside, so obvious, so constructed. Every element of it visible in retrospect as deliberate, and he had been inside it for years and hadn't seen it. He had been the mechanism. The carefully maintained instrument that a very patient man had spent over a decade tuning to produce exactly this note, at exactly this moment. He knew about Padmé from the beginning, Anakin said. He started walking again. Couldn't have the children standing still, couldn't have the clones finding 12 stationary life signatures on a scanner. He's known since Naboo. He was the one who kept finding reasons to put us in proximity, the assignments, the mission structures. He cultivated the attachment deliberately because he needed a lever. Something the Jedi Code would prevent me from discussing with the Council, something I would protect at any cost. He stopped himself, then finished it anyway. He built the trap around the thing I loved most and waited for me to walk into it. The youngest children didn't understand this. He could feel that clearly through the Force their comprehension of the conversation was partial, impressionistic, the way children absorbed adult conversations at the edge of their understanding. They knew it was serious. They knew Anakin was describing something that had hurt him. Beyond that, the specifics were above them. But the older ones understood. He felt it in the quality of their silence. The visions, Marin said carefully, of her dying. Anakin's step didn't break. You felt that too? We felt something. Weeks ago. A darkness around you that kept getting heavier. Master Urok noticed it. He mentioned it to Master Che, I think. There was a conversation about whether to bring it to the council. A pause. I don't know if they did. They hadn't, or if they had, the council had responded with its characteristic combination of concern and distance, acknowledging the problem while maintaining the approach that had defined their relationship with Anakin for 14 years. Trust him enough to use him, not enough to actually reach for him. He had been their weapon and their worry in equal measure, and they had never quite resolved the contradiction. The visions were real, Anakin said. Or they were made to feel real. I'm not certain anymore which. He moved them around a collapsed section of ceiling, guiding the smallest children over the debris by hand, lifting the Mirialan girl across a gap that was too wide for her stride. Palpatine told me the dark side had the power to prevent death. That Darth Plagueis, his own master, had discovered the technique. That he could teach me. Could he? Marin asked. I don't know, Anakin said. I chose to believe he could, because I needed to believe it. That's the mechanism. You don't deceive someone by offering them a lie. You deceive them by offering them the truth they most desperately need, and making the price feel temporary. Marin was quiet for a moment. What was the price? He asked, though from the quality of his voice it was clear he already knew. Everything, Anakin said. The Jedi. The Republic. Everyone in this building. He felt the weight of it settle through the children behind him like a physical thing, slow and pervasive. He needed me to believe that the cost was acceptable, that saving one person justified every other loss. And he stopped. Not because he couldn't finish the sentence. Because finishing it in front of 12 children who had nearly been the cost required a precision he wasn't certain he possessed. You believed him, Marin said. Quietly, without judgment, which was somehow worse than judgment would have been. For long enough, Anakin said. The service hangar door was 30 meters ahead. Master Skywalker, Marin said. Don't call me that. What should I call you? Anakin looked back at him, at the 12 faces in the amber half-dark, watching him with the attention that children gave to adults who had told them something enormous and were waiting to see what came next. Anakin, he said. He turned toward the hangar door and kept moving. The service hangar on level 7 smelled like coolant and old rust. 3 vessels sat in their docking cradles. A mid-sized new class shuttle with a cracked forward viewport. A cargo hauler so old it still bore a pre-Clone era Republic emblem, and a single occupancy courier ship stripped for parts. Anakin assessed. The shuttle would fly. The viewport crack was cosmetic. The seal was intact. The damage in the outer layer only. The engines were Jedi series. He hated Jedi series engines. He could fly them anyway. The shuttle, he said. Move. The children moved without being told twice. He was halfway across the hangar floor when he felt it. A presence. Force sensitive. Above them, dropping through the temple's levels with focused velocity. Not a clone. Clones were force null. This was someone blazing in the force. And the signature was, familiar, down. Anakin said. 12 children dropped to the floor. Anakin remained standing, one hand moving to his lightsaber hilt without drawing, because familiar meant he needed more information before he decided what igniting a blade communicated. The hangar's side access door blew open, not with an explosion but with a precise kinetic push that took the door off its track without damaging the frame. The figure that came through was moving at a dead sprint and pulled up short when he saw Anakin. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood 15 meters away, blood drying in a rust-colored line down the side of his face, robes torn at the right shoulder. Breathing elevated in a way Anakin had only seen from him a handful of times in 14 years. Blue blade ignited, held at a guard position that was technically neutral, but could transition to offensive in under a second. His eyes moved from Anakin's face to the unignited hilt on Anakin's belt, then to the 12 children on the floor. The guard position didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. Anakin, he said. One word. The way you said someone's name when you had spent the last hour believing they were dead and hadn't yet recalibrated. Master, Anakin said. Obi-Wan's eyes moved across the children again, doing the same count, automatically without choosing to, then came back to Anakin's face, and stayed there. Reading it. He had always been able to read Anakin's face better than anyone alive. Better than Anakin could read it himself, and whatever he found now was doing something complicated to his expression. You were with him, Obi-Wan said. Not accusation, the tone of a man assembling facts before deciding what they meant. I felt you in the Force, in his office. And then I felt... He stopped. I felt Mace. Yes. Anakin said. The blade didn't lower. Tell me, Obi-Wan said. Not here. We need to be off this level before the clone sweep reaches us. I'll tell you everything, but not standing still in an unsecured hangar. Tell me now. Quietly, firmly, the voice that had ended arguments in the field for 14 years. I need to understand what I'm looking at before I decide what to do next. Anakin looked at him for a long moment. Then he told him. Not the version he had told Marin, the controlled informational debrief, the flat voice, the carefully managed distance between the events and the person describing them. He told Obi-Wan the way you told someone who had known you for half your life, which meant without the protection of clinical language, which meant the shape of it was visible in the telling. He told him about the visions of Padmé, about the weeks of dreaming and waking from the dreams, and reaching across a bed in the dark to confirm she was breathing. About Palpatine's private invitations, the conversations in the opera house and the office and the corridors, the patient and systematic construction of an argument that the Jedi couldn't save her, and the dark side could. About the night Mace had come to him and said the Chancellor is a Sith Lord, and he had felt his entire architecture of carefully maintained denial develop a crack he couldn't repair. About going to the office. About what he found there. About the choice on the window ledge. He did not soften the window ledge. Obi-Wan listened to all of it without interrupting, which was not his natural mode. Obi-Wan interrupted, questioned, pushed back. It was how he thought, and the fact that he didn't do any of those things while Anakin was speaking told Anakin more about the weight of what he was hearing than any response could have. When Anakin finished, Obi-Wan was quiet for a moment. Then he extinguished his blade. How long? Obi-Wan said. Not quite a question. The beginning of one he was deciding whether to finish. Since Naboo, Anakin said. Possibly before. He was engineering proximity from the beginning. Every private conversation, every expression of faith when the Council expressed doubt, all of it was architecture. He was building something specific, and I was the material. Obi-Wan turned away from him and walked 3 paces toward the shuttle and stopped there with his back to the hangar and his hand on the hull of the ship, not gripping it, just resting against it. The way you rested your hand against a wall when the ground had moved. I should have seen it, Obi-Wan said. You couldn't have, don't. His voice was quiet but absolute. Don't tell me I couldn't have seen it because it's not true, and we both know it's not true. I saw the relationship. I watched it develop. I raised concerns to the Council, once, early, and then I allowed myself to be reassured because reassurance was available, and the alternative was a confrontation I didn't know how to have. He turned back around. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he had finished feeling something, and was moving it to the part of himself where he stored things that needed to be carried rather than addressed. I failed you. Specifically and measurably. That is a fact I am going to have to carry, and I am going to do that. But not right now. His eyes moved to the children. Right now we need to move. Marin Roll stood up from the floor without being told. Obi-Wan looked at him. You're the senior Padawan? I'm the oldest. I'm not technically a Padawan yet. Master Yurok was going to assign me at the end of this term. Something crossed Obi-Wan's face, brief and controlled. Yurok was a good man, he said. Yes, Marin said. He was. They held each other's gaze for a moment, the old master with blood drying on his face, and the 10-year-old who had decided he was not going to fall apart today, and something passed between them that didn't require the Force to transmit. Can you fly that shuttle? Obi-Wan asked Anakin, already moving toward it. Adequately, I've always hated that word from you. It means you'll do something impossible and then be modest about it afterward. He reached the boarding ramp and turned back. Where are we going? Away from Coruscant. Somewhere we can warn surviving Jedi before, Bail Organa, Obi-Wan said. Anakin looked at him. He's been watching the Senate's movement toward authoritarianism for years. He has resources, ships, and the political intelligence to understand what Palpatine is doing without needing it explained from first principles. Obi-Wan started up the ramp, and he is one of the few people in this city I trust to not have already called the clones. The children moved toward the ramp. Anakin counted them as they passed, the automatic count, and when the last one was aboard, he looked back at the hangar one final time. Smoke had reached level 7. It came under the doors now, thin fingers of it feeling across the floor, with the patience of something that didn't have anywhere else to be. Somewhere above him, in an office that was already becoming a throne room in all the ways that mattered. Darth Sidious sat with the ruins of his face, and the first small awareness that one variable had not performed as designed. Anakin walked up the boarding ramp. The ship that nobody thought mattered lifted out of the hangar bay and turned its nose away from the burning temple and accelerated into the Coruscant night. Nobody saw it go, because nobody had thought to watch for it. And that was the only advantage they had. From the shuttle's forward viewport, cracked outer layer, intact seal exactly as advertised, Coruscant fell away beneath them. The temple's burning was visible even from altitude, as a dark column rising through the lower atmosphere, bending east with the wind. Anakin watched it until the cloud cover took it, then set the autopilot for low orbit and stood up from the pilot's seat, because sitting still was no longer something his body was willing to do. The children had distributed themselves through the passenger compartment with the unconscious organizational intelligence of people who had spent their entire lives in communal spaces, the smallest near the rear bulkhead, the oldest in a loose perimeter around them. Marin sat at the compartment's forward edge where he could see both the children behind him and the cockpit ahead. He had not put down the training saber. Obi-Wan worked the communications array with focused efficiency. The shuttle's comm system was a generation old and was making him work for it. Anakin stood in the gap between cockpit and compartment and thought about Mustafar. Not because he wanted to, because Palpatine had told him to go there. The order had been given in the last 30 seconds before Anakin had left the office, before the training hall, before the 12 faces, before the crack that split Lord Vader down the center and let Anakin Skywalker back through. Go to Mustafar. Eliminate the Separatist leaders. Complete the work. It had been the final piece of the design, the action that would have committed him so thoroughly to Palpatine's agenda that turning back would have required not just will, but the dismantling of everything he had done in the previous hour. Palpatine was very good at building structures that made turning back feel impossible. He was also, Anakin was realizing, very good at something subtler, making his instructions feel like they originated from the person following them. The Mustafar order hadn't felt like an order in the moment. It had felt like the obvious next step, the natural continuation of a logic that Anakin had been living inside for so long, he had mistaken it for his own thinking. Palpatine had told him to go there. The order had been given in the last 30 seconds before Anakin had left the office, before the training hall, before the 12 faces, before the crack. Go to Mustafar. Eliminate the Separatist leaders. Complete the work. It had been the final piece of the design, the action that would have committed him so thoroughly that turning back would have required not just will, but the dismantling of everything he had done in the previous hour. Obi-Wan, he said. Nearly there, Obi-Wan said without turning. Organa's personal frequency is, I need to go to Mustafar. The comm work stopped. Obi-Wan turned and looked at him with the specific quality of attention he reserved for statements that required immediate re-examination of all surrounding context. Palpatine ordered me there, Anakin said. He wants the Separatist leadership eliminated. Gunray, Tambor, the entire Confederate Council. They're gathered there because Dooku told them it was a safe house. They don't know Dooku is dead. They don't know they're being discarded. He kept his voice level. If I don't go, Palpatine knows immediately that something went wrong. His new apprentice disobeyed the first operational order. He starts looking for where the deviation occurred, and finds 12 missing younglings in a stolen shuttle. And if you do go, Obi-Wan said, He thinks his plan is intact. He spends the next several hours consolidating his Senate position, managing the narrative around Order 66, building the architecture of the Empire. He's not looking for us because he doesn't know he needs to look. You're proposing to use his own timeline against him, Obi-Wan said. I'm proposing to give us time, which is the only resource we currently have none of. From the compartment, Marin's voice. You'd go alone? Anakin turned. The boy had moved to the cockpit doorway without making noise. He stood there with the training saber and the expression of someone following an argument to its logical conclusion and not liking where it arrived. Yes, Anakin said. To a planet full of people Palpatine wants dead, pretending to be his apprentice. Alone, I was his apprentice for approximately 4 hours, Anakin said. I have a reasonable understanding of the performance requirements. That's not funny. It wasn't a joke. Marin looked at Obi-Wan. Can he do this? Obi-Wan turned back to the comm array. Anakin has an extraordinary talent for operating in situations that should be impossible. It is one of the things about him that has always given me the most anxiety. A pause. Yes, he can do this. What about the people on Mustafar? Marin pressed. If Anakin goes there as Vader, what happens to them? They don't get executed, Anakin said. Palpatine's order is to eliminate them, Anakin continued. I'm going to arrive and make it appear I've begun the operation, which buys time in 2 directions. Palpatine thinks I'm completing the mission, and the Separatist leadership remains alive long enough to be useful. Useful how? As witnesses, Anakin said. Gunray and the others have been coordinating with Dooku, Palpatine's proxy, for 3 years. They have communications, financial records, operational orders. Evidence that the Chancellor of the Republic has been simultaneously funding and directing the enemy the Republic has been fighting. That evidence is worth more to us right now than anything else in the galaxy. Obi-Wan's hands stopped on the comm array. He turned around slowly. You want to use the Separatist leadership to expose Palpatine, he said. I want to use every resource available, Anakin said. We have 12 children, 1 damaged shuttle, and the element of surprise, which expires the moment Palpatine realizes I'm not following orders. Every minute I spend on Mustafar pretending to be his instrument is a minute you spend getting those children somewhere safe and building the case that removes him from power before he finishes consolidating it. He'll sense it, Obi-Wan said quietly. If you go to Mustafar and don't complete the mission, Palpatine is extraordinarily sensitive. He'll feel the absence of what should have happened. Not if I give him something to feel instead, Anakin said. He expects Vader on Mustafar, dark side energy, the particular signature of his new apprentice completing a mission. I can give him that signature, without the outcome. I spent 10 years constructing the emotional armor that produces that reading. I know what it feels like from the inside, because I've been living there. He paused. I can wear it without becoming it. For long enough. Can you? Obi-Wan said. Not challenging. Asking. I walked into a room with 12 children and chose not to kill them, Anakin said. I was Lord Vader when I walked through that door. I chose not to be. That's the answer to your question. Obi-Wan was quiet for 3 full seconds. Bail Organa, he said finally, turning back to the comm. I'll reach him, transfer the children, and follow you to Mustafar. You're not coming to Mustafar. Anakin, you're the only Jedi Master currently unaccounted for who knows the full scope of what Palpatine has done, Anakin said. If I go to Mustafar alone and something goes wrong, you're what's left. You don't get to spend that on Mustafar. He paused. Get the children to Organa. Start building the case. I'll get you the evidence, and I'll be back before Palpatine realizes the mission wasn't completed. From the doorway, Marin said, And if you don't come back? Anakin looked at him. At the 10-year-old with the training saber and the unfinished Padawan status, and the face that had decided falling apart was not currently scheduled. Then, Obi-Wan will handle it, Anakin said. He always does. Obi-Wan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite not one. That is simultaneously the most generous and most burdensome thing you have ever said to me. The comm array chimed. A frequency locked. A voice came through the static, measured, alert. the voice of a man who had been awake for hours waiting for something to go wrong and had now received confirmation that it had. "This is Organa." "Who's there?" "An old friend," Obi-Wan said. "With children who need shelter and a story that will require you to sit down before I tell it." A pause on the other end. "How many children?" 12. A longer pause. "I'll have the Tantive 4 ready in 20 minutes. Send me your position." Obi-Wan sent it. The comm clicked closed. He turned back to Anakin with the expression that had accompanied every mission both of them had known was dangerous, and neither had found an alternative to. "Come back," Obi-Wan said. "I always come back. You have a remarkable talent for making that sound more reassuring than the statistics support." Anakin moved back to the pilot's seat, disengaged the autopilot, and began calculating the jump to Mustafar. The coordinates were already in his head. He had been carrying them like a stone in his pocket since Palpatine gave the order. He plotted the route with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had made worse choices with less preparation, and survived them. Behind him, 12 children watched him work and said nothing. Marin put his hand briefly on the back of the pilot's seat. He didn't say anything either. He didn't need to. Mustafar was not a planet so much as an argument the universe was making about the nature of endings. Everything here was in the process of becoming something else. Rock becoming liquid, liquid becoming gas, gas becoming the thick orange haze that sat permanently over the surface, like a decision that had been made, and couldn't be unmade. The mining facility that the Separatist leadership had been told was a safe house clung to its promontory above the lava, flows the way desperate things clung to inadequate structures, which was to say with complete commitment and no real confidence. Anakin brought the shuttle down through the haze alone. The transition from the shuttle's interior to Mustafar's atmosphere was a physical event. Heat that had weight to it, air that tasted of sulfur and ancient geological violence, the sound of lava moving in the channels below with the slow patience of something that had been doing this for 1 billion years, and would be doing it long after the facility and everyone in it had been reduced to components. He walked down the boarding ramp and felt the planet press against him from every direction and thought, not for the first time, that Palpatine had chosen this place for a reason that went beyond logistics. Mustafar felt like punishment. It felt like somewhere you sent things that were finished. He walked toward the facility entrance and put on the face. It wasn't a conscious performance exactly, more like a controlled surrender to the part of himself that had been building for years, the part that the dark side had been slowly furnishing and refining across a decade of war and grief and choices that compounded on each other. He let his face go still, let his eyes go flat, let the anger that lived permanently in his chest rise to exactly the surface level that Vader required, present, visible, controlled, promising. He walked toward the facility entrance, and the doors opened before he reached them. The Separatist leadership had been watching his approach on their security feeds and had drawn the obvious conclusion: the Sith Lord had arrived. Which meant the situation had resolved in their favor, which meant they were safe. People believed what they needed to believe. Palpatine had taught him that. He was using the lesson. Newt Gunray met him in the entrance corridor. The Neimoidian viceroy was wearing the particular expression of someone who had been frightened for a very long time and had just been told the frightening thing was over, which meant his relief was doing combat with his natural tendency toward suspicion, and the relief was winning on points. "Lord Vader," Gunray said. "We were beginning to wonder, where are the others?" Anakin said. His voice came out correctly, lower than his natural register, stripped of the expressiveness that 14 years of Obi-Wan's influence had built into his speech patterns, carrying the specific flatness of someone for whom other people's comfort was not a factor in any calculation. He had not planned to sound like that. It had arrived with the face. Gunray took him to the conference room. The Confederate Council occupied it with the compressed discomfort of powerful people in inadequate circumstances. Fold-out chairs, a mobile halotable personal comm unit stacked against one wall. Tambor with his electrostaff propped against his chair. Poggle the Lesser communicating in the wing gesture dialect that required a translator droid hovering at his shoulder. Sandhill with his long fingers wrapped around a comm unit he had clearly been using moments before Anakin entered. They all looked up when he walked in. The relief in the room was immediate and collective and wrong in a way that hit Anakin somewhere specific. because these people believed they were saved, believed the dark side's instrument had arrived to secure their victory. And the gap between what they believed and what was actually standing in front of them was enormous, and they couldn't see it at all. "Lord Vader," Sandhill said, rising, "the Jedi, the operation proceeded?" "It proceeded," Anakin said. "And Palpatine's position is secure." The room exhaled. He stood in the center of it and felt the dark side pressing at the edges of his control, and did not move. He needed information, not the summary, not the public record of Confederate leadership decisions that the Republic's intelligence services already had. He needed the operational evidence, the direct communications between Dooku and Palpatine, the financial architecture that connected the Chancellor's office to the separatist war machine, the orders and responses that proved beyond inference that both sides of a 3-year war had been managed by one man from one office on Coruscant. The problem was that Gunray was watching him with the resuming suspicion of a man whose relief was wearing off, and the suspicion was pointed at the right target for the wrong reasons. Gunray had been afraid of Vader before he arrived and was now recalibrating that fear to account for Vader's physical presence in the room, and the recalibration was producing a wariness that would complicate a direct request. "I need your records," Anakin said. Gunray's eyes moved to the others and back. "Our records." "Your communications with Darth Tyrannus," Anakin said, using Dooku's Sith name deliberately. "The financial transfers, the operational directives, everything transmitted through the Confederate command structure that originated with Tyrannus. Those records are..." Sandhill began. "Lord Sidious requires them," Anakin said. The room changed. Not dramatically. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. But the quality of attention shifted from the wary deference of people managing a dangerous ally to something tighter, the specific stillness of people who had heard something that didn't match the shape of what they expected. "Lord Sidious," Gunray said carefully, "has always accessed those communications through Lord Tyrannus." "Lord Tyrannus is dead," Anakin said. He watched the information move through the room. Dooku was dead. Their primary contact to the power structure they had been serving was gone. "Dead," Gunray repeated. "How?" "That is not your concern. The records are. Provide them." Gunray looked at him for a long moment, calculating. The calculation was visible. Lord Vader was standing in front of him, had just confirmed that their movement's primary Sith contact was dead, and was requesting records that would normally be transmitted through that contact. The request was unusual. The circumstances were unusual. The question was whether unusual meant threatening. "Of course," Gunray said finally. The calculation had resolved in the direction of compliance, which was where Neimoidian calculations usually resolved when the alternative was a Sith Lord with a lightsaber at close range. He moved to the mobile holodable and entered a long access code, and Anakin watched the data architecture appear above the table and felt something settle in his chest that wasn't quite relief, but was adjacent to it. 3 years of communications. Financial transfers in amounts that would fund a mid-sized planetary government for a decade. Operational orders that bore Dooku's signature, but originated in routing patterns that traced back to Coruscant's government district. Everything Palpatine had built. Everything he had hidden. Visible, right here. On a holodable in a mining facility, on a lava planet. "I'll need a physical transfer," Anakin said, "to a personal data unit." Gunray produced one without asking why. Anakin began the transfer and became aware, through the Force, that someone else had entered the facility. Through the emergency access on the eastern side, the one the security feeds didn't cover. He felt the presence before he registered what it meant. And then he registered what it meant, and the recognition hit him like something physical. He knew that presence the way he knew his own breathing. "Excuse me," he said to Gunray, and walked out of the conference room. The eastern corridor was empty. He rounded the bend out of the security camera's sightlines and stopped. Obi-Wan Kenobi stepped out of the shadow of a support column. "You said you weren't coming," Anakin said. "I said the children were going to Organa," Obi-Wan said. "I was very precise about that. I didn't make any representations about my own movements. That's a distinction without a." "I got the children to bail," Obi-Wan said. "They're safe. Marin is already arguing with Bail's security chief about perimeter protocols, which I found simultaneously concerning and deeply impressive. He stepped forward. His eyes moved to the data unit in Anakin's hand. Did you get it? Anakin held it up. Obi-Wan let out a breath he had apparently been holding for some time. All of it? 3 years of communications, financial records, operational directives. Everything that connects Palpatine to the Confederate leadership and proves he was running both sides. He paused. The Separatist Council is in the conference room. They think we're allies. We need to keep them thinking that long enough to get off this planet, Obi-Wan said. Agreed. Anakin looked at him. I told you not to come. Yes, Obi-Wan said simply. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just stood there in the orange half-light with blood still dried on his face and his lightsaber on his belt, and the absolute stillness of someone who had made a decision and was entirely at peace with it. Anakin looked at him for a long moment. You followed me, he said. Not accusation. Just the fact of it. I have been following you, Obi-Wan said quietly. Since you were 9 years old and Qui-Gon brought you to the temple and I had no idea what to do with you. I'm not planning to stop now. The lava moved in the channels below the facility, patient and absolute. Anakin pocketed the data unit. Then let's go, he said. The Tantive 4 was moving fast through hyperspace toward Alderaan when Anakin arrived. In the main cabin, 12 children were experiencing the particular exhaustion that followed sustained adrenaline. Limbs heavy, eyes slow, the careful emotional control of the last several hours requiring active maintenance. Several of the youngest had already surrendered to sleep entirely. Marin Roll was not asleep. He sat at the cabin's forward end with a datapad Bail's aide had provided, reviewing the Jedi Temple's emergency contact protocols, the encrypted frequencies that masters in the field were supposed to monitor, the code structures that indicated survivors. The protocols assumed a functional temple sending signals. They had not been designed for the scenario where the temple itself was the thing that had been compromised. Bail Organa sat across from him, watching the boy work. He had been watching for 20 minutes, since Obi-Wan's shuttle had docked and the children had come aboard and Obi-Wan had briefed him in the corridor outside the main cabin, in the compressed, precise language of a man delivering information he needed someone else to act on immediately. Bail had listened without interrupting, which people who knew him understood was the highest form of attention he could offer, and when Obi-Wan finished he had said 3 things. The children are safe here. What do you need? And how long do we have? The answer to the third question was what had Bail sitting across from a 10-year-old at this hour, watching him work through communication protocols. Not long enough. You're trying to reach the survivors, Bail said. Marin didn't look up from the datapad. I'm trying to figure out who the survivors are first. Then reach them. He paused. There's a difference. If I broadcast on the emergency frequency without knowing who can hear it, I'm also broadcasting to whoever is monitoring those frequencies on Palpatine's behalf, which by now is probably everyone. Bail looked at him steadily. How old are you? 10. Marin glanced up briefly. People keep asking me that. I imagine they do. Bail leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You understand what's happening. Not just tonight, the larger shape of it. Palpatine is Emperor now, Marin said. It came out flat. The flatness was the feeling, the compression of something enormous being held at functional distance. The Republic is over. The Jedi Order is. He stopped. Looked back at the datapad. Most of the Order is gone. The ones who weren't on Coruscant were with their clone battalions in the field. Order 66 caught them wherever they were. Utapau, Kashyyyk, Felucia, Megiddo. He named the planets with the rhythm of someone reciting a list they had constructed from partial information and didn't want to complete. Master Kenobi was on Utapau. He survived. We don't know who else did. Master Yoda, Bail said quietly. He was on Kashyyyk. I received a fragmentary communication from him before I was diverted to the temple. Marin looked up fully for the first time. Master Yoda is alive? As of several hours ago. Yes, something moved through the boy's face. Not relief exactly, because the situation was too large for simple relief, but the specific recalibration of someone who has been operating on the assumption of total loss and has just received information that requires them to revise that assumption upward by one extraordinary data point. He'll need to know about the records, Merrin said. The Confederate communications. Whatever Anakin got from Mustafar. That's the most important thing right now, getting that evidence to people who can use it before Palpatine realizes what it is and starts closing the channels. Obi-Wan has the data unit, Bail said. He's in the comm room now attempting to establish an encrypted connection to. The cabin door opened. Obi-Wan entered with the expression he wore when the news was bad, and he had already processed it and was now in the business of communicating it efficiently. He had cleaned the blood from his face at some point during the journey, which made the exhaustion underneath it more visible rather than less. Palpatine is looking for this ship, he said. Bail stood. How certain? 3 Imperial patrol vessels have changed their headings in the last 20 minutes in a pattern consistent with a search grid centered on our last known position. He either tracked us directly or anticipated Bail as a probable destination for survivors. Both are possible, Bail said. He's known about my political opposition for 2 years. We need to move Padmé, Anakin said. The cabin turned. Anakin Skywalker stood in the doorway that connected to the docking corridor, still in the dark clothing from Mustafar, the data unit in his hand. He had been listening from the corridor. Bail stared at him. I thought you were still on. We jumped as soon as we had the data. He came fully into the cabin, eyes moving across the children with the same counting motion. Finding Merrin and holding there for a moment. I'm back, we don't have time for that, before moving on. Palpatine knows the mission wasn't completed. He'll have reviewed the temple security feeds. He's smart enough to connect the absence of youngling bodies to a missing shuttle to Confederate records to this ship. He set the data unit on the table, in front of Bail. He's going to move on Padmé. She's the lever he has left. Obi-Wan's face changed. He knows about her? He's known for years. He cultivated the knowledge specifically because it was useful. As long as Padmé is on Coruscant, accessible to whatever Imperial infrastructure he's been building for the last 6 hours, he has something he can use against me. He paused. Against any exposure we try to build with that data. If he takes her, Obi-Wan began. He doesn't need to do anything obvious, Anakin said. He just needs me to know she's within reach. The threat is the leverage, not the execution. He looked at Bail. Can you get her off Coruscant? Bail was already moving to the comm panel. I have people in the Senate apartments. If she's willing to move, she'll be willing. Tell her. He stopped. Considered how to communicate how much danger you're in to a woman he had married in secret, across an open channel, in 30 seconds or less. Tell her the situation has changed, and I'm coming for her. She'll understand what that means. Bail sent the message. The cabin held its breath around the wait. Merrin had set down the datapad and was watching Anakin with the focused attention he brought to everything. You said he used her as a lever to turn you, Merrin said. Yes, Anakin said. And now he's going to try to use her as a lever to turn you back. Yes, so the answer is to remove the lever, Merrin said. Get her somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't reach her. And then he has no mechanism left. That's the theory. What's the problem with the theory? Anakin looked at him. The boy was 10 years old and had been awake for hours since the temple started burning, and he was still running the logic forward to its next complication. The problem, Anakin said, is that getting her off Coruscant requires someone to go back to Coruscant. The cabin was quiet. Which means going back into the place we just left, Obi-Wan said. Which is currently the most heavily monitored location in the galaxy, administered by a man who knows our faces and has a clone army. Yes, Anakin said. And you're proposing to do this yourself. I'm proposing we don't have another option, Anakin said. Bail's people can get her to a point of extraction. But extraction from a planet under Imperial control requires someone who can move through that environment without triggering every alarm Palpatine has running. That's not Bail. It's not you. It's me, because I spent 4 hours tonight as Lord Vader, and I know what the performance requires, and I know where the gaps in surveillance are, because I helped design the operational approach before I decided not to implement it. Bail's comm chimed. He read the response from his Coruscant staff. His face changed. She's already moving, he said. My people reached her. She says, he looked up. She says she knows. She says she felt something in the Force 2 hours ago, and she's been packed since. Anakin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Merrin was still watching him. She's Force sensitive? The boy asked. No, Anakin said. She's just very good at knowing things she shouldn't be able to know. He picked up the data unit and handed it to Obi-Wan. Get that to Yoda, whatever channel, whatever method. That evidence is the foundation of everything. Without it, we have testimony. With it, we have proof. Obi-Wan took it. And you. I'll be behind you. With Padmé. Anakin, Obi-Wan's voice carried the weight of a man who had already said come back once tonight and was finding the second time harder than the first. He'll be expecting you to go back for her. It's what he's counting on. I know, Anakin said. Then, he's counting on me to go back for her because I love her, Anakin said. And he's right. I do. And I'm going back for her. He picked up his lightsaber, the blue blade. His blade, the one that had not ignited in the training hall when 12 children looked at him. But he built his entire plan on the assumption that love makes me predictable, that it makes me manageable. He looked at Obi-Wan steadily. He forgot that it also makes me very hard to stop. He turned toward the docking corridor. Behind him, the smallest of the children stirred in their seats. The Mirialan girl said, without opening her eyes, he's going to be all right. She said it with the absolute confidence of someone stating a fact rather than expressing a hope. Merrin looked at her. Then he picked up the datapad and went back to work. Palpatine had not slept in 31 hours. This was not unusual. He had trained his body across decades of Sith practice to require sleep the way other men required it, occasionally, briefly, as maintenance rather than necessity. The dark side sustained him in ways that biology alone could not. Fed energy into the spaces where rest would otherwise be mandatory, kept the machinery of his mind running at the temperature he required. He had gone longer than 31 hours before. He had gone longer during the Naboo crisis, during the early Clone Wars, during the careful and exhausting work of being two people, simultaneously, for 13 years. But tonight was different. Tonight the machinery of his mind was running hot in a way that had nothing to do with the dark side's sustenance, and everything to do with a variable that refused to resolve cleanly. He sat behind his desk in the office that was already ceasing to be a chancellor's office. The transition was happening in the details, in the small adjustments his staff had been making since the Senate session. The way the Red Guards had repositioned themselves at the new vectors he had specified, the way the lighting had been recalibrated to something starker and more deliberate, and he reviewed the reports coming in from across the galaxy with the methodical attention of a man reading the results of an experiment he had been running for a very long time. The results were almost perfect. Order 66 had executed with a precision that genuinely pleased him. Not every Jedi was confirmed dead. He was not naive enough to expect total efficiency from a biological mechanism deployed across thousands of simultaneous locations, but the order was broken. The temple was burning. The Senate had granted him emergency powers with the relieved enthusiasm of people who had been waiting for someone to solve their problems and had finally found a volunteer. By morning, the language of Empire would begin appearing in official communications, and by the end of the week it would feel like something that had always existed. Almost perfect. He reached out through the Force toward Mustafar. He had been doing this periodically for the last 2 hours, the intervals between each reach growing slightly shorter as the evening progressed, because his new apprentice had not communicated, and while the absence of communication was not inherently alarming, Lord Vader was not required to provide status updates. The mission's completion would be its own announcement. The Force itself was providing information that required interpretation. He felt Vader on Mustafar. The dark side signature was present, active, identifiable. The anger was there. The focus, the particular compression of emotion into directed purpose that Vader's unprecedented midi-chlorian count produced when properly channeled. All of this was consistent with an apprentice completing a mission as ordered, but something underneath it was wrong. He could not identify it precisely. That was the problem. It was not an absence Vader's presence was too strong to miss. It was subtler than that. A texture difference, like reaching into darkness and finding that the darkness had a slightly different quality than expected. Not light, Nothing so dramatic, but not quite the darkness you had placed there either. He pressed a control on his desk. Commander Thayer. Yes, my lord. The Jedi Temple. The Youngling training hall on level 4. I want a full accounting of what was found there when the sweep teams reached it. I'll have a report within the hour, my lord. You'll have it within 10 minutes, Palpatine said, and released the control. He stood and moved to the viewport. He thought about Anakin Skywalker. Not Lord Vader, Anakin Skywalker, the raw material, the boy from Tatooine with the impossible midi-chlorian count, and the mother he had loved with an intensity that had made him the most exploitable being Palpatine had ever encountered. He had spent over a decade constructing the conditions of Skywalker's fall, with the patience of an artist who understood that great work required great investment of time. The architecture had been flawless. But architecture only worked if the material inside it remained predictable. His desk comm chimed. Thayer's voice, ahead of schedule. My lord, the sweep team's report on the Youngling training hall. Go ahead. The hall was found empty. No bodies. No evidence of combat. The security feed shows Master Skywalker entering at approximately 40 minutes after the operation began. He remained inside for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When he exited, the children were not with him, but there were no bodies. The emergency exit at the hall's rear was found open. The emergency exit leads to the maintenance walkways, Palpatine said. Yes, my lord. We've traced a probable route to the Level 7 service hangar. One vessel is missing. A new class shuttle registered to the Temple's supply division. And my apprentice's current location? Mustafar, my lord. His shuttle is docked at the Separatist facility. All sensors indicate he is inside. Palpatine stood very still at the viewport. The texture difference had a name now. Restraint. His apprentice had walked into a room full of children with a lightsaber in his hand and chosen not to use it, and had then constructed a scenario that explained his presence on Mustafar without requiring him to have completed his first assignment. The performance was good. The dark side signature was authentic enough that a less sensitive practitioner would have read it as completion. But Palpatine had spent 1,000 years of accumulated Sith knowledge refining his perception beyond what less sensitive practitioners could achieve. And what he was reading on Mustafar was not an apprentice who had killed 12 children and then executed the Confederate leadership. It was an apprentice who was performing the emotion of it. He turned from the viewport. The fury that rose in him was cold. He had mastered the hot version of fury decades ago, burned through it, refined what remained into something more useful. Cold fury was a tool. It clarified rather than obscured. It did not make him want to destroy things. It made him want to understand exactly what had gone wrong, and then correct it with surgical precision. He sat back down at his desk. Skywalker had not killed the younglings. He had taken them somewhere. He had then traveled to Mustafar not to complete his assignment but to acquire something, the records, most likely, the Confederate communications that represented the only documentary evidence of Palpatine's dual control of the war. He was building a case, which meant he was not alone. Kenobi, of course. Kenobi had survived. He had sent the Jedi Master to Utapau, to Grievous, calculating that the distance and the mission would keep him occupied until Order 66 resolved the question of his continued existence through the local clone garrison. But Grievous was dead. Kenobi had confirmed that before communication went dark, and a man who had killed General Grievous in single combat and then been shot off a cliff by his own men had an uncomfortable habit of not dying when the mathematics suggested he should. Kenobi had reached Skywalker. Or Skywalker had reached Kenobi. The sequence barely mattered. What mattered was that the two of them were operating together with the Confederate records and 12 missing children, and the window during which he could address this quietly, before it became a political problem, before evidence reached hands that knew what to do with it, was closing. He pressed another control. Senator Mas Amedda. Chancellor. The Chagrian's voice was carefully neutral. I need the location of Senator Bail Organa's ship. The Tantive 4th. I want its current position and heading within the hour. A pause with a specific quality to it. Of course, Chancellor and Mas Amedda. This request does not appear in any communication log. It was not made. Do you understand? Perfectly, Chancellor The calm closed. Palpatine sat back and pressed his fingertips together and thought about the variable that had failed to perform as designed. Skywalker's flaw had always been the same flaw. The mother on Tatooine, the Padawan he had treated as a brother, the senator he had married in secret and loved with a totality that bypassed calculation entirely. Every lever Palpatine had ever used on him had been a variation of the same mechanism. Threaten what he loves, and he will do anything to protect it. The flaw had built Lord Vader. And now, apparently, the same flaw had interrupted Lord Vader at the precise moment of his completion. The question was not whether Skywalker could be recovered. He could. The power was too extraordinary to abandon. The investment too vast to discard. The question was how to rebuild the architecture now that the original structure had been compromised. The approach that had worked across 14 years would not work again in the same form. Skywalker now understood the mechanism. He had seen it from the inside. Which meant Palpatine needed a new lever. He thought about Padmé Amidala. She was alive. She was carrying Skywalker's children, twins. His Force sense had confirmed that much. Had been tracking the pregnancy with the detached interest of someone monitoring an asset. She was currently, as far as his intelligence indicated, at the Senate apartments on Coruscant. Within reach. He did not move immediately. He sat for a long time at his desk in the office that was becoming a throne room, and turned the problem in his hands the way you turned a stone, examining each face, and he felt the cold fury doing its clarifying work, and by the time he stood again he had the shape of his response. Skywalker had chosen the children over Lord Vader. He would make Skywalker choose between the children and Padmé. The outcome, Palpatine was confident, would be different this time. Anakin brought the courier ship, pulled from the Tantive 4's auxiliary bay, smaller and faster, registered to a shell company Bail maintained for exactly this category of necessity, down through Coruscant's lower traffic lanes with his hood up and his Force presence compressed to the smallest possible signature. The Senate district lay ahead. He extended his senses carefully. Not a full sweep, something narrower. Targeted, he was looking for two things simultaneously. Padmé's Force-adjacent presence, the warmth he could locate because 14 years of proximity had made her familiar in ways that bypassed formal sensitivity, and the cold mechanical attention of Imperial surveillance. He found both. Padmé was in the lower parking structure beneath the Senate apartments, moving, accompanied by two people whose bearing through the Force read as professional protective, Bail's people as arranged. She was calm in the controlled way that meant she had decided something, and was executing it, and had put everything else aside until the execution was complete. The surveillance was heavier than he had expected. Not clone units, not physically, not yet. But the sensor architecture that had been deployed across the Senate district in the last several hours had the density and placement pattern of something designed by someone who knew exactly where a person trying to extract a specific senator would need to move. The coverage wasn't general. It was specific. It had been built for this extraction, which meant Palpatine hadn't just anticipated Anakin coming back for Padmé. He had prepared for it. Anakin landed the courier ship on a private platform 3 levels below the Senate apartments, and sat for a moment with his hands on the controls, and thought about the shape of what he was walking into. Palpatine had designed a trap. The trap was elegant in the way that all of Palpatine's work was elegant. It didn't announce itself as a trap. It announced itself as a situation. The surveillance coverage created a perimeter that would register any extraction attempt. The registration would trigger a response calibrated, not to prevent the extraction, but to intercept it at the point of completion. When Padmé was already away from the apartments and moving toward the departure point, when the highest value outcome for Palpatine, Anakin choosing to surrender in exchange for her safety, was most achievable. He had built this trap while knowing that Anakin knew he would build it. The trap accounted for that. Because regardless of how clearly Anakin saw the mechanism, the emotional reality of Padmé in danger would override the tactical reality of a prepared interception. Palpatine had used this calculation before, and it had worked. He was using it again, because from his perspective nothing fundamental had changed. Anakin still loved Padmé. Anakin was still willing to take extraordinary risks to protect her. And those two facts produced a predictable behavior pattern, regardless of whether Anakin was aware of being predicted. Anakin got out of the ship. He moved through the parking structure using the maintenance corridors, following the path his force sense told him Padmé was taking 2 levels above, matching her pace, staying parallel. He had known where the service hatches were since he was 19 years old, and had spent 3 weeks guarding a senator in this building, memorizing its layout with the thoroughness of someone who had been raised in environments where knowing the exits was survival mathematics. He came up through a service hatch into a utility corridor on Padmé's level and moved until the warmth of her presence was directly ahead. And then he stepped through a door and found himself in a storage room that was currently occupied by his wife, Bail's 2 operatives, and a collection of senatorial archival crates that smelled of old flimsoplast and political history. Padmé turned when he came through the door. She crossed the room in 3 steps and put both hands on his face and looked at him with the complete and focused attention she brought to anything she needed to fully understand. Whether he was injured, whether he was himself, what the last several hours had done to him. He let her look. She had always been able to see him more clearly than he saw himself. Had been able to do it since Naboo when she had looked at him across a transport and seen a boy who was trying very hard to be more than he was, and had decided to let him try. He let her look now because she had earned the right, and because what she would find was different from what she had found the last several times she had looked, and he needed her to know that. "The children," she said. "Safe," he said. "On Bail's ship." "Moving," she exhaled. "I felt something happen. Hours ago. In the temple. I know I'm not sensitive, but I felt something. Like a door closing." Her hands were still on his face. "And then I felt you. Different." "Different how?" "Like something had broken and you were holding the pieces," she said. "That's the only way I can describe it." He covered her hands with his. "We need to move. He's built a surveillance perimeter around the extraction route. He's waiting for us to complete the move, and then intercept at the departure point." Padmé didn't ask who he was. She had understood who he was when she read Bail's message 2 hours ago and packed a single bag. "He'll have the upper platforms covered," she said. "Yes, and the main traffic corridors." "Yes, but not the Legislative Archive shuttle," she said. Anakin looked at her. "It runs on an automated schedule," Padmé said, with the particular calm of someone who had spent 8 years learning the mechanical rhythms of this building, the way a general learned terrain. "Twice daily. It carries document transfers between the Senate archive and the records facility on the far side of the government district. It departs from the sub-level bay in 40 minutes. It's not a passenger vessel, so it's not on the departure registry that surveillance would be monitoring." She paused. "I've ridden in it twice. During recesses when I needed to move without press attention. Bail's operatives exchanged a glance. That's either brilliant or Palpatine has thought of it too," one of them said. "There's one way to determine which," Padmé said, and picked up her bag. The sub-level bay was 4 corridors and a service elevator away. They moved through it with Bail's people, in their default configuration. One ahead, one behind, Padmé in the middle, and Anakin flanked her left with his hood up and his force sense running its narrow targeted sweep, feeling for the cold attention of surveillance. The clinical alertness of someone positioned to intercept rather than move. 3 corridors clear. The 4th corridor was where he felt it. Not surveillance equipment. A person. Force sensitive. Positioned at the far end behind a door that stood slightly ajar. The particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for a specific signal and had just received it. Anakin stopped walking. "Down," he said. Nobody questioned it. Bail's operatives moved Padmé against the wall. Anakin stepped forward and ignited his blade, and the blue light filled the corridor and the door at the far end opened. An Inquisitor stepped through. He had not known about the Inquisitors yet, not in this timeline, but he recognized what he was looking at with the immediate recognition of someone whose force sense could read intent the way other people read faces. A dark side practitioner. Young, recently turned. The corruption in their force signature was fresh, not yet fully settled, the way a wound looked different from an old scar. They held a double-bladed lightsaber in a form that was competent but not refined, and their eyes had the brightness of someone who had been promised something in exchange for this and was here to collect. "Lord Vader sent us," the Inquisitor said, and smiled. Or rather, He would have, if Lord Vader existed. Two more came through doors on either side of the corridor, blades igniting red in Anakin's peripheral vision, the trap within the trap completing itself with the satisfaction of a design performing as intended. 3 Inquisitors, a corridor with no exit behind them. Padmé against the wall. He breathed. He felt the dark side respond the way it always responded to danger. Immediate, eager, presenting itself as the obvious solution. The fastest route through the problem. It was not wrong about being fast. It was not wrong about being effective. He knew exactly what he could do with 3 Inquisitors using the full power the dark side provided, and the knowledge was specific and detailed and entirely accurate. He also knew what it would cost him to do it that way. He had paid that cost before. He chose differently. He reached into the Force with the light side, not the compressed, managed version he had been maintaining all night, but the full connection. The one that felt like Qui-Gon's hand on his shoulder at 9 years old. The one that felt like Obi-Wan's voice in the dark of 100 desperate situations. The one that had been buried under years of anger and fear and grief, and was still there. Had never stopped being there. Was in fact stronger now than it had ever been, because he had spent the last several hours choosing it over and over in the face of everything that argued against it. He opened it completely. The Force came through him like the first clean breath after years of breathing something that wasn't quite air, and its quality, not visible, not literal, but present in the way things were present in the Force, filled the corridor from wall to wall. All 3 Inquisitors stopped, not from the light, from what was underneath it. The darkness in them, fresh and unsettled and not yet fully theirs, recoiled from what Anakin was projecting the way new corruption recoiled from something that reminded it of what it had replaced. Their connection to the dark side wavered. Their grip on their blades loosened slightly. 1 second. Maybe 2. It was enough. He moved through them with Ceresu's economy, and Gemso's power, and 20 years of accumulated skill. 3 precise engagements in under 4 seconds, disarming rather than killing, blades redirected and wrists controlled, and bodies put on the ground with the minimum necessary force. They were not his enemies in any fundamental sense. They were Palpatine's victims. He understood that now in a way he hadn't before tonight. He stood over the 3 of them and looked back at Padmé. She was already moving toward the sub-level bay. 40 minutes, she said as she passed him. He followed her. The archive shuttle sat in its cradle with the patient indifference of automated machinery that operated on schedule regardless of what the organic world was doing around it. Empires rising, temples burning, corridors filling with red light. It had a departure time and it intended to meet it. Anakin got Padmé and Bail's 2 operatives through the bay door with 6 minutes to spare. Then he felt Palpatine. Not through the surveillance network, through the Force directly. The massive, cold, ancient presence of Darth Sidious, moving through the Senate building with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided to handle something personally. He was close. "Get on the shuttle," Anakin said. Padmé, read his face. "He's here. Get on the shuttle. All of you. The departure is automated. It will leave on schedule regardless of whether I'm on it." Anakin, Padmé, he turned to look at her fully, giving her the 30 seconds this required. "I know what I'm doing. I need you off this planet. The data unit is with Obi-Wan, the children are with Bail, and you are the last thing on this planet he can use against me. Once you're gone, I'm not manageable. I'm just dangerous." He paused. "Get on the shuttle." She held his gaze for a long moment with the expression that meant she was examining the argument for flaws, and had found it structurally sound and hated that she had. She got on the shuttle. Bail's operatives followed. The boarding ramp began its automated retraction. Anakin stood in the bay and watched the running lights cycle through their pre-departure check, and felt the moment when Padmé understood he wasn't coming in behind her, and felt her choose not to come back down the ramp, because he had asked her to trust him, and she was trusting him. The cost of that trust was visible in the Force, even at increasing distance. The shuttle lifted. The bay doors opened and it moved out into Coruscant's morning, and was gone. Anakin turned around. Palpatine stood in the bay doorway. He was alone. No guards, no Inquisitors, no clone unit at the corridor intersections behind him as reinforcement. Just the man himself, in the dark robes that he had worn for 30 years as a costume and now wore as his actual skin. With the yellow eyes and the collapsed face, and the hands folded at his front with the patient precision of someone who had never needed external reinforcement to be the most dangerous thing in any room. "Anakin," he said. "Don't," Anakin said. Palpatine considered this. "Don't what? Don't use my name like that. Like I'm still the person you built. Like the familiarity of it means something after tonight." He ignited his blade. Blue light filled the bay. "You've been using my name since I was 9 years old, and every time you said it you were building something. I'm not interested in what you're building anymore." Palpatine looked at the blade, at Anakin's face. The expression he wore was not anger or the cold fury Anakin had expected. It was closer to curiosity, the careful clinical interest of a man examining an experiment that had produced an unexpected result. "The training hall," Palpatine said. "You walked in and you walked out again. With them." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me what happened." "A boy asked me what to do," Anakin said. "He trusted me completely. And I remembered what that felt like from the other side." "Sentiment," Palpatine said, not dismissively. "Analytically, yes," Anakin said. "You've spent 14 years telling me sentiment was a weakness. You were wrong. It's the only thing tonight that worked." Palpatine descended 3 steps into the bay, unhurried, each step placed with the deliberateness of someone repositioning, establishing the geometry of the space between them on his own terms. Anakin tracked the movement and adjusted his stance and kept his blade between them. "You understand that the records change very little," Palpatine said. "The Senate has granted me emergency powers. The clone army is deployed. The Jedi Order is broken," Anakin said. "Not destroyed. There's a difference you're going to discover. A handful of survivors are enough," Anakin said. "With the evidence, they're enough. The Senate gave you emergency powers because they were afraid, and they didn't know what they were afraid of. When they understand what they were afraid of was you, the calculation changes." He paused. "You built your empire on the assumption that nobody could prove what you are, that the only witnesses were either dead or discredited. You were very thorough about that. Every Jedi who might have testified, every senator who had gotten close to understanding the structure of it." He looked at Palpatine steadily. "You forgot about the separatist leaders. They have records going back 3 years. They know Tyrannus worked for you. They know you funded both sides." Another pause. "They're alive, by the way. I didn't kill them." The yellow eyes didn't change. That was the tell. In a normal person, information that catastrophic would produce a reaction, a blink, a shift in posture, a micro-expression of something. Palpatine's eyes simply continued to regard him with the same steady analytical attention, which meant the information had landed and been processed and assessed, and the response to it was already being constructed. All of it invisible. "You've been very busy," Palpatine said. "I had a productive evening." Palpatine reached into his robe and his hand came out empty. And then the force contracted around him like an atmosphere compressing before a storm, and Anakin felt it coming, and moved. Not to dodge. To meet. The lightning erupted from Palpatine's hands in the concentrated form he had used on Mace Windu, not the wide dispersal version, but the narrow focused beam that could push through lightsaber defenses if the angle was right. Anakin caught it on his blade and felt the impact travel up his arms through the hilt and didn't give ground. "You're stronger," Palpatine said. The lightning didn't stop. "Interesting, the dark side. I'm not using the dark side," Anakin said through his teeth. The lightning intensified. Anakin pushed back with the force, not the dark side's rage-fueled push, but the light side's version, which was quieter and less immediately dramatic and significantly harder to sustain, but which didn't cost him anything he wasn't willing to spend. The bolt bent. Just slightly. Just enough. Palpatine's eyes registered the anomaly. "Impossible," he said. "You keep saying that about things that are happening." He pushed forward, not attacking, but changing the geometry, pushing Palpatine toward the bay's center, away from the doorway, away from the corridor behind him where clone units were finally arriving in response to the force disturbance. Clone units who were, Anakin noted, not moving with the coordinated lethal efficiency Order 66 should have produced, because the inhibitor chips in their brains had encountered a subroutine. Palpatine recognized the intent and stepped sideways, creating a new angle. His second hand came up and the lightning split, 2 bolts from 2 sources, and Anakin deflected one with his blade and took the other across his left shoulder and felt it burn, and kept moving. He didn't use the pain. That was the piece he had learned tonight. He had been taught that the correct response to being hurt was to pull the anger of it into the dark side and let it amplify power. He had done that for years without knowing he was doing it. Tonight he felt the burn and set it aside the way you set something down when you needed your hands free for a different purpose. He reached into the Force with his free hand, not for a weapon, not to throw something. He reached for the shuttle bay's emergency containment system, the magnetic seal installed in every Senate building's hangar after an incident 30 years ago, and activated it. The containment field snapped into place across the bay's exit, not a barrier that would hold a Sith Lord indefinitely. Maybe 30 seconds. Enough. Palpatine turned to look at the containment field, and in the half-second that his attention moved, Anakin hit him with the Force, not lightning, not a crushing grip, a push, direct and massive, the full output of 22,000 midichlorians channeling the light side in a single sustained burst. Palpatine went back. Not off his feet, he was too skilled, too experienced. But he went back 3 steps. 4. His control of the space disrupted. His lightning interrupted. The clone units hit the containment field from the other side. Anakin heard them. Boots. Equipment. A military response arriving 30 seconds too late to matter. Then, he heard something else. A lightsaber igniting behind Palpatine. Green blade. Yoda dropped from the ceiling vent with the silence of someone who weighed 45 pounds and had spent 9 centuries learning to move without announcing himself, and landed between Palpatine and the wall. He looked up at the Sith Lord with the ancient eyes that had seen everything, and the expression that had no anger in it, and no fear, and nothing that could be manipulated. Just the absolute settled stillness of someone exactly where they intended to be. "Surprised to see me, are you?" Yoda said. Palpatine looked at the green blade, at Anakin's blue blade, at the containment field behind him and the clone units pressing against it from the other side, clone units who were not moving with the coordinated lethal efficiency Order 66 should have produced. Because the inhibitor chips in their brains had encountered a subroutine that the person who wrote it had learned from a very patient Sith Lord, who was currently standing between 2 lightsabers. "You were on Kashyyyk," Palpatine said to Yoda. "Left early." "I did," Yoda said. "Felt something happening. Followed it here. The green blade didn't move. End this. It is time to." Palpatine looked at both of them, and for the first time in the entire night, in the entire length of a plan that had been running for decades, Darth Sidious had nothing to calculate toward. He moved. Not toward Yoda, not toward Anakin. Straight up, Force speed carrying him to the bay's ceiling in a single motion, hands already building the lightning into the wide dispersal version. The room-clearing version, the one that filled every cubic meter of available space with enough electrical output to stop a human heart 6 times over. Anakin crossed his arms over his face and pushed the Force outward in every direction simultaneously. The lightning hit the barrier and scattered. Not perfectly, not cleanly. 2 arcs found gaps. One caught Anakin across his right forearm, the other hit the bay floor and traveled through the metal and discharged into the containment field's power coupling. The field went down, the clone units came through, and stopped. They stopped because the subroutine did exactly what it had been designed to do. Introduced enough signal degradation into the Order 66 imperative that the men receiving it stood in the doorway with their weapons half raised and their bodies refusing to complete the motion, caught between programming and the thing underneath programming that had always been there, the part that had names and brothers, and the memory of Jedi generals who had stood in front of them on 100 fields and made the difference between living and not. 3 seconds of stopped. Yoda used them. He crossed the bay floor in the way that Yoda moved when the situation required it, not the walking stick shuffle of a very old creature conserving energy, but the other version, the the one that trainees who had only seen the former refused to believe existed until they saw it. He covered the distance before Palpatine had fully descended, and the green blade was already moving in the arcing pattern of Ataru that Yoda had been refining since before Palpatine's grandfather was born. Palpatine met it with both hands and raw dark side power, and the bay filled with the sound of energy meeting energy at a frequency that made the walls resonate. Anakin moved to the clone units in the doorway, not to fight them. He stood in front of the closest trooper, the one whose weapon was raised highest, whose chip was fighting the subroutine most aggressively, whose body was closest to completing the motion, and he said, clearly, without the performance of either Vader or the managed version of himself from the last several hours. Just his actual voice, "You don't have to do this." The trooper's weapon hand trembled. "I know what's in your head," Anakin said. "I know the order that's running. I know it feels like it came from you, like something you decided. It didn't come from you. It was put there before you were finished growing, by the same man who put the war together, so he could end it on his terms." He kept his voice level. Not pleading, not commanding, just true. "You have brothers behind you. Whatever you decide in the next 10 seconds, they're going to decide with you. So decide what you actually want." The weapon lowered. Not all of them. 3 of the 12 brought their weapons down in the next 4 seconds. 2 more did it slowly, reluctantly. The remaining 7 held their positions with the rigid stillness of men, in whom the subroutine and the original programming were exactly balanced, locked, going nowhere. 7 weapons not pointed at him. He'd take it. Behind him the duel was producing light, green and the blue-white of lightning strobing against the bay walls. Yoda and Palpatine had been moving continuously, and the Sith Lord's advantage in raw power was being met by 900 years of technical refinement in a way that wasn't producing a clear winner, so much as escalating cost to both parties. Palpatine was bleeding somewhere. His robe was darker at the left side in a spreading pattern that meant Yoda's blade had found a gap in his defenses. He was running on the dark side's capacity to override what his body was telling him. Considerable, but not infinite. Yoda was breathing harder than Anakin had ever seen him breathe. Anakin made a decision. He crossed the bay toward the duel and reached into the Force with both hands, and did the thing that neither Yoda nor Palpatine could have anticipated. Because it required being exactly what Anakin was, someone who had spent the last several hours choosing the light side from inside a dark side architecture, someone who understood both with a specificity that came from lived experience rather than academic study. He reached into Palpatine's connection to the dark side. Not to use it. Not to pull power from it. To interrupt it. The technique had no name that he knew of. It existed because of what tonight had required him to understand about the relationship between the light and dark sides of the Force, that they weren't separate rivers but the same water moving in different directions, and that someone standing at the point where they met could, for a moment, change the direction of the current. Palpatine felt it immediately. The yellow eyes found Anakin across the bay and for the second time tonight showed something that wasn't part of any calculated response. Not fear exactly. Something that fear would eventually become if given enough time to develop. His connection to the dark side stuttered. 1 second. Less than 1 second. A gap in the flow of power that had been sustaining him through injuries that should have ended the fight 20 exchanges ago. Yoda's blade completed an arc that had been building for the last 3 exchanges. The Ataru sequence that looked like 4 separate attacks but was actually 1 attack expressed across 4 moments. And the final expression of it caught Palpatine's remaining lightsaber and sent it across the bay floor in a spinning arc of red light that terminated against the far wall. Palpatine stood without a weapon. The dark side was already rebuilding around him, the gap was closing. Anakin could feel it happening in real time and couldn't sustain the interruption without pulling on resources he wasn't willing to spend. But the gap had been enough. The weapon was gone. The injuries were real. The position was broken. "Yield," Yoda said. His voice was not loud. It carried anyway. Palpatine looked at the green blade. At Anakin. At the bay around him, the walls marked with the evidence of everything that had happened here. The emergency field coupling still sparking where the lightning had damaged it. the morning light of Coruscant beginning to come through the bay's exterior opening, with the patience of something that didn't know or care what had occurred inside. "This changes nothing," Palpatine said. "The Senate's vote stands. The emergency powers are already being challenged," Anakin said. Bail Organa is transmitting the Confederate records to every independent senator in his network. By the time the Senate convenes this morning, half of them will have reviewed documentation that proves you funded the war on both sides. He paused. The other half will have heard from the Separatist leadership directly. Because they're alive. And they're very interested in discussing the terms under which they cooperate with a war crimes tribunal. Palpatine's face did something that wasn't quite an expression. "You cannot arrest the Supreme Chancellor without the Senate's authority," Yoda said. "Required? It is. Contacted. Senator Organa has been. Convening. An emergency session is. Arriving. It will, before this morning ends." He tilted his head slightly. "Patient. We can be." Palpatine was still for a long moment. In the doorway behind him, 5 clone units had their weapons pointed at the floor. The other 7 remained locked. The sound of the facility settling in the aftermath of the duel moved through the walls, the kind of silence that followed large force expenditure in a confined space when the air was still charged, and the stone had absorbed more energy than its designers had intended. Then he sat down on the bay floor. Not a collapse, not a defeat in any physical sense. A calculation completing. The most patient man in the galaxy recognizing that the variable which had failed completely, that the architecture he had built across decades had developed a crack at its foundation that no repair could address, that the experiment was over. He sat down and folded his hands and said nothing further. Anakin looked at him for a long time. At the man who had found a 9-year-old slave on Tatooine through proxy and spent 14 years turning him into a weapon. At the face that had worn warmth like a garment for decades, and underneath it had been only this, the cold, brilliant, absolute patience of something that valued nothing except its own continuation. He thought about what the face had looked like across a desk when a 15-year-old Padawan had brought him his first field report from the Outer Rim, beaming with the specific pride of a boy trying to make an adult proud of him. He thought about what the face had looked like at the opera, leaning forward with the expression of a man sharing a confidence, when it had told him the story of Plagueis the Wise and watched him absorb it and calculated exactly what that absorption meant. He felt the dark sides whisper, "Even now. Even here." The voice that said, "End it. It's cleaner. He'll find a way out of any legal process. You know what he's capable of. Finish it." He put it aside. He put it aside because a 10-year-old boy named Marin Roll was on a ship somewhere above Coruscant with 11 other children, and they were going to grow up in the galaxy that got built in the next several years. And what got built depended on what got chosen in moments like this one. He had spent enough of his life making the choice that felt inevitable rather than the choice that was actually right. He deactivated his blade. The blue light went out. Yoda kept his ignited. That was Yoda's decision to make. Anakin walked to the bay's exterior opening and stood in the morning light that was finally, genuinely, winning its argument with the city's luminescence. And he reached out through the Force toward the ships moving through Coruscant's upper atmosphere and found the Tantive Force signature, and within it the 12 small lights he had been counting since the training hall. All 12 present. All 12 accounted for. He held his comlink to his mouth. Obi-Wan. The response was almost immediate. Obi-Wan had been waiting. Which meant Obi-Wan had known approximately how long this would take, which was either Force intuition or the result of 40 years of knowing Anakin Skywalker, and it didn't really matter which. "Anakin," Obi-Wan said. "It's done," Anakin said. "Bring them back." A pause. "All of them?" "All of them." Another pause, longer, with a quality to it that Anakin recognized as Obi-Wan deciding not to say several things in favor of saying the most important one. "Well done," Obi-Wan said finally. The comlink clicked closed. Anakin stood in the bay opening and looked out at Coruscant waking up into a morning it didn't yet understand was different from every morning that had preceded it. And he thought about what came next. The Senate session, the tribunal, the long and complicated work of dismantling something that had been building for 30 years. The question of what the Jedi Order became when it had to rebuild from 12 children and a handful of survivors, and the knowledge of how it had been blind. He thought about Padmé on the archive shuttle, watching the government district recede below her with the focused attention of someone already composing the speech she would give when she got back. He thought about Marin Roll and whether anyone was going to assign the boy a master now, and whether that master should be him, and what exactly he had to offer a student given everything he was and wasn't. He didn't have answers. The morning light came through the bay opening and landed on his face, and he let it. And the dark side was there at the edge of his awareness, the way it had been all night. The second heartbeat, the current that ran underneath everything, and he acknowledged it the way you acknowledged weather, present, real, not in charge of what you did next. He was not redeemed. He understood that clearly. Redemption implied a clean slate, and his would never be clean. He carried the memory of what he had almost done in the training hall with a fullness that no amount of correct subsequent behavior would dissolve. He would carry it tomorrow, and in a year, and in 20 years, and that was appropriate. That was the correct weight for the thing he had almost done. But the children were alive. The 12 lights were still present in the force above him, moving back toward Coruscant through the morning, and they were alive because a boy had asked him a question, and trusted him to answer it honestly, and he had chosen to deserve that trust instead of betray it. It was enough to build on. He turned from the bay opening and walked back into the work. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.